Hey there, welcome to the Bible in 5. You're going to be reading the book of Job for about a week and a half here. And the book of Job is one of my favorite books of the Bible. Depending on what kind of person you are, it may be one of the more difficult books in the Bible to read, or you may just love it. Because the body of the book is just dense poetry. And it's a brilliant, thought-provoking book. And I think you're going to find yourself challenged by it. The cast of characters in this book there's four main characters, the character of Job and 3 friends, and none of whom are Israelites. This is in a faraway place, a long ago time. Nothing in the book specifies when or where this is all taking place. And we're introduced to this guy named Job, and we're told he's a righteous man, he's a good man, he honors God, and so on. But the opening of the book is structured so that it begins and ends with a narrative prologue and a narrative epilogue. And then the body of the book is poetry, these poetic discussions here. And the key thing to understanding the book is getting what's going on in these narrative frames right here. So the book sets you up, introducing you to what a good person Job is. He honors God. And then you're transported into the heavenly realms. And it's like you're watching a conversation between God and this figure called the Satan in Hebrew, which is a word that just means accuser or prosecutor. And so the Satan comes to God and he says, the only reason Job obeys you and so on is because you bless him. You show him your favor. He says, what if you take your blessing away? Then how's he gonna respond? He won't fear you and honor you. And so God allows Job to undergo suffering and hardship to show Job's true character and his integrity. So that's how the story begins, which means that from the beginning, you and I, as readers, we know more than any of the characters in the story. And so the book becomes almost like an observation room where we watch Job undergo these hardship and suffering, and we learn things about how we can process our own hardship and suffering and how God is involved or not involved and so on. So out of the narrative framework begins the poetry of the book. And the center of the book here, chapters 3 through 37, is Job talking with his friends. Job has 4 friends who come and dialogue with him, and it's set up like a cycle of discourses. So Job says something, then the 3 friends respond, then Job responds, 3 friends respond, and so on. So there's 3 friends he's dialoguing with here, and essentially their main point in everything they're saying to him is they use the theology that they learned, say, from the book of Proverbs. They say, well, if you're wise and righteous, then good things will happen to you. If you sin or you're wicked, then bad things will happen to you. So Job, you're suffering, you're undergoing hardship, you must have done something wrong. And Job begins to protest and get more angry, and he's like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know what I've done. I don't know why God is allowing me to undergo this hardship and suffering. And he really begins to wrestle. He gets pretty ticked off. And essentially, he just begins to take up his case with God. And he wrestles with God. He says some very provoking things to God. Why are you letting me let this happen? Are you even good, God? It's very powerful. The capstone of the discussion with the friends is a guy named Elihu, and he essentially reinforces most of what the friends are saying, but Job maintains his integrity. And so what happens then, after the conversation stops, God speaks up. And these are called the God speeches, chapters 38 through 41. And what's interesting about this is supposed to be God responding to Job. Job finally gets what he wants. He gets an audience, a hearing with God. But what God responds is not directly related, it seems, to Job's situation. God starts talking about creation, like, do you know how the weather works? Do you know when it's going to rain or where there's lightning? Do you know where wild mountain goats live? Have you ever been there to watch a deer give birth to its young? Have you ever hung out with a mountain lion and so on? He starts talking about creation. God starts talking about his management, his sustaining of all of nature and creation. And it ends with God talking about these 2 fantastic creatures. They're called Behemoth and Leviathan. And most likely, these are creatures that are well known from ancient Near Eastern mythology. They're the most powerful, scariest creatures you can imagine, like dragons for us in our culture or something. And he says, they're like my playthings. So what God is doing here, and we're kind of like, how does this relate to Job's suffering? What God's essentially saying is, Job, there's a whole big wide world out there full of mystery and wonder, the raw power of nature. And when I'm at work in the world, you may not understand it. There may be things that are mysterious to you. And it's not because I'm not just or I'm not good. It's because you're a small human. And that's essentially where things end with the God speeches. And so Job's response is very humble. He says, "You're right. I'm sorry for accusing you of injustice. I have stepped out of my bounds. The world is much larger than what can be contained in my head." So he humbles himself before God. And then the narrative frame ends here, and this is crucial for understanding the book. God comes and he says to the friends, he says, "You guys spoke wrongly about me." He says, "You guys thought you had me figured out for how I work in the world. The wicked will always be punished and the righteous will always be rewarded." He says that's a wrong way to talk about God. And then he says, "Job has spoken rightly about me." So in other words, Job, with all of his wrestling, his frustration, but coming to a place of honesty before God, he says that's a right way to think about me. So essentially what happens in the book of Job is it does not unlock the puzzle of why God allows suffering or hardship or why it happens in our world, but Job becomes a model for us of how to undergo hardship and suffering. We can be fully honest. We can be angry at God. We can process. We can yell. We can stamp our feet. But the journey is to somehow come to a place of humility before God and to recognize He knows more than we do and our story is not over yet. It's a very profound book, and I hope you find it challenging, and I hope that its voice can speak to you in the midst of your hardship and your suffering when you undergo it. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.